over here. When we had one file, what did we do? We had, once we knew the file name, what did we have to do? Someone clicked on the open file dialog, say, hey, a file was picked. You went in, say, what's the file? You go to the file name, it says IBM-month, blah, blah, blah. What were you supposed to do at that point? I just told you, I clicked IBM-month. What do you need to do from that point on? That's right, you want to read the data in order to have what come back, okay? So you know there's a file out there. You're gonna read it. What do you expect to have when given back to you once you read the file?
A list of candlesticks?
A list of candlesticks, that should be like that. You did the project, didn't you? You understand what you did, okay? You have to be able to answer like that. I mean, there's nothing complicated so far, so you want to ask yourself, and I'm doing this not just for you, but for those of you who might have said, ooh, I can't quite answer that right away, you might want to come and, talk in the office, see what the issue might be. But yes, I got the file name, I gotta read it. And when I read it, I don't want to come back with just a bunch of strings. I want to have this thing read it for me and say, here's your list of candlesticks. And what object or class did we use to read the data and return a list of candlesticks? What object was that?
Stream reader?
Yeah, we used the stream reader, and we had incorporated the stream reader in what? Our own class of stock reader. Remember that? Now, you didn't have to. You could have just decided to use stream reader right off the bat. Say, hey, stream reader, go read the file, and then you could have had a loop to go through each line, turn each line into a candlestick, and put that into the list, okay? In any case, let's say that you had a stock reader, which that would have been our own class, which would have incorporated or used the stream reader to read that, okay? And when it would read, what it would do, it would generate for us a list of candlesticks. Okay? And that list of candlestick is what we would bind, or we would maybe do a binding list from that. You can do it either way, okay? You can, let's do it this way. You could bind this to the data grid view and to the chart, and that would be like 3 lines of code. 1 line of code to do the binding to this. There were 2 lines of code, 1 to bind to that, and then you had to tell the chart explicitly data bind so that it would display. And again, I think I might have explained it, but the reason this guy only needed to be told, here's your data source, and it would display it right away, whereas a chart, you could tell the chart, here's your data source, but it wouldn't do anything until you explicitly told it data bind. The reason being, this is not a complicated object. Once you tell it where the data is, it can very quickly just display it. But the chart is a bit more complicated. There's a lot of knobs and buttons that you can set. And therefore, when you would tell this guy, here's your data source, the designers knew that, well, we shouldn't just display right away. There may be a few other things that the programmer or whoever is using this object, other things that they might need to do. And therefore, let them do whatever they have to do, and let them tell us when they want us to pull the trigger and display. That's what data bind is, okay? So you can bind to a chart, nothing will happen until you actually tell it data bind, and then poof, it will display the data, okay? So now another way, instead of going directly to the list of candlesticks, was that we could go ahead and use a binding list. So from the list of candlesticks, if you wanted to, you could create what is called a binding list. Okay, so the binding list. Oh, and also one of the things that we did here, remember, we filtered by date. We didn't just, because when you read the file, do you agree that we read the entire file? We did. We read the entire file. think about it, look at your code. There was nothing in reading the file that says only read from this date to this date. It read the whole thing. You did a get line. As long as there was data in the file, you were doing a get line. So you read the entire file. It's just that to display, we did not want to display all 2,000 candlesticks or whatever number we got. So that's why we also did a filter by date. Okay, in order to obtain, when you did the filter, you ended up with a smaller list. So this is, let's say the filter operation gave you a smaller list, only between this date and this date. And that's what we could bind to the data grid view or to the chart, okay? So your binding list would be also kind of short. Okay. And you would say, okay, we could have directly bound this list. This is a list of candlestick. Whereas this is a binding list of candlestick. Easy to create because you can construct a binding list of candlestick just by passing it. When you call the constructor, just pass it a list, and it makes essentially the equivalent of that list, but in a binding list. Now, what's the difference? Is that the binding list can create events, so when you connect a binding list, so when you bind it to a control, they now talk to each other via events. Events in the sense that if I go to this list or to this data grid view and I remove a row, it will tell the binding list, hey, we removed a row, which is a candlestick, and the binding list would remove that from its list. Excuse me.